Every family dreams of a place to call home, a safe haven where love, laughter, and memories can flourish. For Bruce and Deborah Bennett, this dream came true in the picturesque town of Aurora, Colorado. Their home was nestled in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood, surrounded by kind neighbors and the scenic beauty of Colorado's rolling hills. Bruce and Deborah were the embodiment of the American dream. Bruce, a Navy veteran, was a man of discipline and dedication. After serving his country, he transitioned to civilian life with the same focus and determination. He managed the family's furniture store, a business built with hard work and care, while also studying to become an air traffic controller. Bruce's days were long, but he never failed to make time for his family. Deborah, his wife, was the heart of the household. Known for her kind smile and nurturing personality, she created an environment filled with warmth. She adored their two daughters, Melissa and Vanessa, and made sure every moment at home was filled with love and laughter. Deborah was also an excellent cook, often experimenting with recipes that filled their home with the smell of freshly baked cookies and hearty meals. Melissa, the eldest daughter, was a vibrant and curious 7-year-old. She loved school and excelled in her classes. Her teachers often described her as bright and friendly, the kind of child who made friends wherever she went. Melissa had an adventurous spirit. She loved climbing trees, riding her bike, and exploring the world around her. Vanessa, only 3 years old, was the family's bundle of joy. With her chubby cheeks and big, curious eyes, she was always exploring the world around her. Vanessa had a particular fondness for her stuffed animals, often carrying her favorite teddy bear everywhere she went. Despite the age difference, Melissa and Vanessa shared a close bond. Melissa took her role as the big sister seriously, always looking out for Vanessa and including her in her adventures. The Bennett's home wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary. The living room was filled with family photos, the walls painted in warm colors that reflected the love within. On weekends, the Bennetts would host family dinners, with Bruce firing up the grill in the backyard while Deborah prepared salads and desserts. The neighbors adored the Bennetts, often describing them as the perfect family. Their house was always filled with the sound of children laughing, and the Bennetts were known for their kindness and willingness to help anyone in need. Aurora was a community where doors were often left unlocked, and families felt safe letting their children play outside until the street lights came on. On January 15, 1984, the Bennetts were preparing for a special occasion, Melissa's upcoming 8th birthday. The excitement in the house was palpable. Melissa had spent weeks talking about her party, planning everything from the cake to the decorations. Deborah had baked a beautiful cake, carefully decorating it with colorful icing and Melissa's favorite cartoon characters. Bruce and Deborah had also planned a surprise, a new bicycle for Melissa, which they kept hidden in the garage. They imagined her face lighting up when she saw it, her laughter echoing through the house as she rode it down the street. That Sunday evening, the Bennetts hosted a small gathering with family members to celebrate. The house was filled with joy, the aroma of home-cooked food wafting through the air. Laughter echoed through the living room as Bruce and his brother joked about old memories, while Melissa proudly showed off her birthday decorations to her grandparents. As the evening wore on, the party came to an end. Family members said their goodbyes, hugging the Bennetts and promising to see them again soon. Bruce's brother reminded him to close the garage door before going to bed, a simple, everyday task that would later haunt those who loved the Bennetts. That night, the Bennetts went to bed like any other family, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. The quiet streets of Aurora, once a symbol of safety, would soon be shrouded in fear and heartbreak. It was a night like any other in Aurora, Colorado. The moon hung high in the sky, casting its pale light over the neatly kept homes. The Bennetts had just finished their small family celebration, and as the night wore on, the peace of their suburban life settled back into routine. But little did anyone know, this quiet, seemingly ordinary evening would be the last time the Bennett family would experience peace for a long time. Bruce and Deborah, tired from a full day of hosting and celebrating, tucked their daughters into bed. Melissa, exhausted from the excitement of her birthday, drifted off to sleep quickly. Her new bike, still a secret to her, sat in the garage, awaiting the moment she would see it in the morning. Deborah kissed both her daughters good night, and Bruce turned off the lights in their rooms, his mind already on the plans for tomorrow. The house was quiet now. The ticking of a clock in the living room was the only sound breaking the stillness. Deborah and Bruce, too, settled into their own bed. They exchanged a few words about the day, talking about the future, their hopes for Melissa and Vanessa. But even as they spoke, an unsettling sense of foreboding lingered, though neither could have known it at the time. The peaceful night, so calm and serene, was about to be shattered by violence. While the Bennetts slept, an unknown figure made his way through the quiet neighborhood. He was a man with intentions no one could have imagined. No one would know his name for many years, but his actions would leave an indelible mark on the Bennett family and the community of Aurora. Unseen and unheard, the intruder moved with precision, aware of the layout of the house. The back door was unlocked, an everyday convenience that, in hindsight, would become a devastating oversight. The intruder slipped inside, careful not to disturb the peaceful slumber of the family inside. His purpose was clear, though the motive was still a mystery. Inside, everything seemed ordinary, almost mundane. But in reality, a sense of danger was quietly creeping in. Bruce and Deborah were oblivious to the presence of the intruder in their home. Their bedroom door was locked, as usual, but that wouldn't be enough to stop what was coming. The intruder's movements were calculated, as if he had done this before. In the silence of the night, the intruder moved from room to room. His focus was unnerving. He wasn't there to steal items or cause a commotion. His actions, cold and calculated, suggested that he had a very specific agenda. He moved toward the bedroom where Bruce and Deborah lay sleeping. Bruce stirred, sensing something was wrong. A slight sound, barely audible, had woken him. Perhaps it was the floorboard creaking, or the movement of a shadow in the corner of the room. He opened his eyes, and for a brief moment, everything seemed normal. The clock on the nightstand read 3:14 a.m., and the house was still. But then, in an instant, his senses sharpened. Something wasn't right. Bruce, still groggy from sleep, tried to shake off the unease that settled over him. He quietly nudged Deborah, but before he could say anything, he saw the figure standing at the edge of their bed. The intruder, now fully visible, was holding a weapon, a crowbar, the tool he had used to break into the house. A split second of silence was shattered by the intruder's sudden lunge. Bruce, a man of strength and military discipline, fought back with all his might. But he was caught off guard, his body still heavy with sleep, his movements slower than they should have been. Deborah screamed in shock, but the intruder didn't hesitate. Deborah, too, tried to defend herself and her family. She grabbed for the nearest object, a lamp, anything to stop the assault, but the intruder was too strong. He overpowered them both with frightening ease. What followed next was a series of horrifying moments that blurred together in the dark of that bedroom. By the time the struggle was over, the Bennett family's world had been changed forever. The intruder, leaving behind destruction and fear, slipped back into the night, vanishing into the shadows from where he came. The house, once a sanctuary of love and warmth, was now a crime scene. In the hours that followed, the quiet neighborhood of Aurora would be awakened to the horrifying truth. But the most terrifying question remained: who was this person? Why had he targeted the Bennetts? And how could a family so full of love and life fall victim to such a brutal and senseless attack? Next time, we'll take you through the investigation, the search for the person responsible, and how this family's life would never be the same again. The aftermath of the Bennett family's nightmare was only beginning. The quiet town of Aurora, which had once been known for its peaceful, safe streets, was now the scene of a chilling mystery. Who had done this? Why had the Bennetts been chosen? And most pressing of all, would the perpetrator be caught before they could hurt someone else? The morning after the attack was one of confusion and disbelief. The Bennett family's home, a place that had been filled with laughter and love just the night before, was now marked as a crime scene. It was just after dawn when police were called to the scene. Deborah, still in shock, had managed to dial 911 after the intruder fled. But by the time the first responders arrived, the house was eerily quiet. Deborah, still dazed from the trauma, had little to offer in terms of a description of the attacker. All she could remember was a dark figure, tall and imposing, with a crowbar in hand. Her mind was clouded with the horror of what had happened in those moments of terror. Bruce, too, was struggling to make sense of it all. He had been too focused on trying to protect his family to fully comprehend what had happened during the attack. The investigators immediately set to work. Every detail of the Bennett house was carefully examined, from the broken door at the back of the house to the discarded crowbar found in the garage. The crime scene was unsettlingly clean. There was no sign of forced entry beyond the door, no evidence of a struggle other than in the bedroom. This was not a random act of violence, it was calculated, deliberate. One of the first steps in any investigation is to canvass the area. The police spoke to neighbors, asking if they had seen anything unusual. But the peaceful nature of the neighborhood worked against them. No one had heard anything, no shouting, no sounds of a struggle. The only sound reported was the faint creak of the door when the intruder entered. Bruce and Deborah Bennett were known in their community as kind, hard-working people. Bruce, a former military man, had a reputation for being tough and reliable. Deborah, a loving mother, was always there for her family and friends. They were not the types of people who would have enemies, at least not any obvious ones. Yet, despite their normalcy, their lives had been forever changed. the investigation into what happened that night would uncover more than just the identity of the attacker. It would unravel a series of secrets, lies, and shocking revelations that no one had expected. It wasn't long before investigators received their first break in the case. A neighbor, who had security cameras installed on the exterior of their home, came forward with footage from the night of the attack. It was grainy and unclear, but it was enough to give the police something to go on. The footage showed a man walking down the street, heading toward the Bennett house just around the time of the attack. The camera captured him entering the alley behind their home, but the image was too blurry to identify him. However, it gave investigators a possible lead, a person of interest to start investigating. Days later, after further investigation, a suspect was identified. His name was James Trenton. A man with a criminal history, Trenton had been arrested several times before for theft and other minor crimes. However, his most recent arrest was for assault, a crime that had somehow slipped through the cracks of the system. Trenton had lived in Aurora for several years, but his name had never been associated with violent crimes until now. With his prior arrests, it seemed like the police had found a potential lead. Was James Trenton the man who had attacked the Bennett family? And if so, why? What could have motivated such a brutal, senseless act? As the investigation into Trenton deepened, the community began to take notice. News of the attack spread like wildfire through Aurora. The people who had once lived side by side with the Bennetts now found themselves questioning their safety. How could something like this happen in such a quiet, close-knit town? "I never thought something like this could happen here," one neighbor said. "Aurora is such a nice place to live. We all look out for each other. But now, it's like we're not safe anywhere." Despite Trenton being the prime suspect, the investigation was far from over. Detectives worked day and night, gathering more evidence, speaking with witnesses, and analyzing everything they could find. The search for answers had only just begun. In the next chapter, we will uncover the twists and turns that followed, the shocking discoveries that turned the investigation upside down, and the truth about the man behind the attack on the Bennett family. Stay tuned as the story of their journey for justice unfolds. As the investigation into the Bennett family's horrific attack continued, the community held its breath. The identity of the suspect, James Trenton, was now public, and the quiet town of Aurora, which had been shaken to its core, now watched closely as the case moved into the legal arena. The arrest was only the beginning of a long, painful journey toward justice. It was just days after the first pieces of evidence pointed to James Trenton that the police made their move. Early one morning, officers surrounded the small house on the outskirts of Aurora where Trenton had been staying. He had been hiding out, attempting to lay low after the attack, but law enforcement knew his whereabouts. Trenton was arrested without incident, though he was visibly agitated. The man who had once been a fixture of the town's criminal underworld now found himself facing the full power of the law. As he was placed into the police car, his expression was a mix of defiance and fear. What had begun as a simple act of violence had escalated into something far more complicated. James Trenton's arrest sent shockwaves through the town. Neighbors, once again, found themselves grappling with the reality that someone they had lived near was now at the center of such a dark and twisted crime. As the investigation shifted into the legal realm, the case took on a new level of complexity. James Trenton was formally charged with multiple counts of assault, burglary, and attempted murder. The prosecution was determined to seek justice for the Bennetts, while Trenton's defense team began their preparations for what would no doubt be a lengthy and contentious trial. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and burglary are serious charges in any court of law. The prosecution had a strong case. Trenton's criminal history, the evidence from the crime scene, and the witness testimony from Deborah Bennett all painted a damning picture of the defendant. James Trenton's defense, however, was prepared to mount a vigorous challenge. His attorney, a man named Henry Matthews, argued that Trenton was not responsible for the attack on the Bennett family. Instead, he claimed that his client had been the victim of circumstances, that he had been coerced into committing the crime by an unnamed figure, someone who had threatened him. He argued that Trenton had been under duress, manipulated by an outside force, and that the evidence didn't definitively prove he was the attacker. The defense would challenge the security footage, the witness testimony, and even the physical evidence found at the crime scene. While the defense's argument seemed flimsy to many, it was a tactic used frequently in the legal world, a way to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. But would it be enough to convince a jury? The trial of James Trenton began with high stakes for everyone involved. For Deborah and Bruce Bennett, it was an opportunity for justice. For Trenton, it was the beginning of a fight for his freedom. And for the people of Aurora, it was the culmination of months of uncertainty and fear. Deborah Bennett, still recovering from the emotional and physical trauma of the attack, was ready to testify. Her account of the attack, as chilling as it was, would serve as a pivotal moment in the case. When Deborah Bennett took the witness stand, her voice trembled, but she was resolute. She recounted the harrowing moments of the attack, describing how Trenton had broken into her home, how he had threatened her family, and how she had fought back. Her testimony was heartfelt, and her words painted a picture of a man who had shown no remorse for what he had done. Under cross-examination, Trenton's lawyer tried to discredit Deborah's account, suggesting that her memory of the night might be distorted by the traumas she had endured. He attempted to suggest that she might have been mistaken in identifying Trenton as the attacker, but Deborah stood firm. Next, the prosecution brought forward a forensic expert who presented evidence gathered from the Bennett home. Blood samples, fingerprints, and traces of DNA were found on the crowbar that had been used in the attack. The expert explained how the evidence linked Trenton to the crime scene, further strengthening the prosecution's case. Despite the mounting evidence, the defense clung to their argument. They suggested that the forensic evidence could have been contaminated, that there might have been a mix-up with the samples. But the prosecution remained confident. In his closing argument, the prosecutor summed up the case against James Trenton. He spoke of the pain the Bennett family had endured, the lives that had been shattered, and the overwhelming evidence that pointed to Trenton as the perpetrator. It was time for justice. But the defense did not back down. They insisted that Trenton had been coerced into committing the crime, and that the evidence was circumstantial at best. It was now up to the jury to decide. The jury deliberated for hours, discussing every piece of evidence, every piece of testimony. Would they find James Trenton guilty, or would they believe his defense? The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. The jury returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. James Trenton was convicted of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and burglary. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and emotion. At his sentencing, James Trenton faced the consequences of his actions. The judge, after hearing from both the prosecution and the defense, sentenced Trenton to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While the Bennett family had received the justice they so desperately needed, the wounds from that night would never fully heal. For them, the trial was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would have to rebuild their lives, piece by piece. In the next chapter, we will explore the aftermath of the trial, the lasting effects on the Bennett family, and the questions that still linger about the man who changed their lives forever. The search for closure, for understanding, continues. The trial had ended, but for the Bennett family, the journey was far from over. The wounds left by the attack, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. Deborah and Bruce, though they had seen justice served, were still left grappling with the pain of that fateful night. For them, the loss of normalcy was a constant reminder that the life they once knew could never return. Deborah spent months attending therapy, working to process the trauma that had nearly torn her family apart. Every day was a struggle, but slowly, she began to rebuild. With the support of her husband Bruce and her children, she started to find moments of peace amidst the chaos of her thoughts. Her therapist helped her understand that recovery was not just about healing from physical injuries but also about finding a way to reclaim the emotional parts of herself that had been shattered. Deborah had been a mother, a wife, and a member of the community before that terrible night. Now, she had to learn how to be those things again. Bruce Bennett, while not physically harmed as severely as his wife, carried his own burden. His sense of duty to protect his family had been shattered. He had failed to stop the violence from taking place, and the guilt weighed heavily on him. At times, Bruce found himself questioning his actions, wondering if there was something more he could have done. Could he have stopped Trenton sooner? Could he have protected Deborah and the kids better? These questions haunted him, despite the fact that he had done everything within his power to protect his family. Bruce was also determined to move forward. He knew his family needed him to be strong, but he also understood that healing required him to be honest with himself. It was a difficult process, but he was ready to confront his feelings head-on. The children of the Bennett family, though not physically harmed, were not immune to the emotional toll of the attack. School became a place where they felt isolated, struggling to reconcile their memories of the trauma with the normality they once knew. Teachers, friends, and even strangers treated them with caution, unsure of how to respond to their experiences. Like their parents, the children faced an uphill battle to reclaim a sense of normalcy. They would never be the same after what had happened, but in time, they learned how to cope with their emotions, with the support of counselors and caring adults in their lives. The town of Aurora, too, was left to pick up the pieces after the Bennett family's tragedy. The attack had shattered their sense of safety, leaving them to question how well they really knew their neighbors. Yet, over time, the community came together to support the Bennetts and one another. People in Aurora found comfort in coming together. They shared their stories, offered help, and showed kindness to the Bennett family. It wasn't easy, but the process of rebuilding trust and safety within the community was a vital part of the healing process. One night, as Deborah and Bruce sat by their fireplace, they spoke about what they had been through. Both of them were changed forever, but they had learned valuable lessons along the way. Bruce looked at his wife, his voice steady but full of emotion. Bruce speaks. I never realized just how much strength you had, Deb. I thought I was the protector, the one who kept the family safe. But you've shown me what real strength is. His words laden with gratitude and sorrow. Deborah looks at him, her eyes soft with understanding. I couldn't have done it without you, Bruce. We've always been a team, and we're going to keep going forward together. No matter what. For the Bennetts, the road ahead would never be easy. But their bond as a family was stronger than ever. The tragedy that had tried to tear them apart had, in a way, brought them closer together. They learned the importance of resilience, of leaning on each other in times of darkness. As the Bennett family rebuilt their lives, so too did Aurora. It wasn't just a place where a tragic event had occurred, it was a place where people came together to support one another, to heal, and to ensure that such a tragedy would never happen again. And so, the story of the Bennett family comes to a close, but it serves as a reminder that, even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility for healing, for rebuilding, and for hope. Justice may have been served in the courtroom, but the real victory was in the way the Bennetts fought to rebuild their lives and the way their community rallied behind them. If you found this story moving, heartbreaking, or inspiring, please consider liking and sharing this video. Your support helps us reach more people and share important stories that need to be heard. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update on the real-life stories that shape our world.